Oh no. Welcome back, webheads, to a next episode of Spidey Swing-Bys. I'm your host, Christian Ashley, as we continue going through every chronological appearance of Spider-Man by release date. So here we are. We are now on Amazing Spider-Man number 3, as I get the right image up there for the in the right setting. So, guys, thank you again for all your engagement here. Really enjoying you guys listening and watching. Continue doing that. Share this around as best you can. Really appreciate what you do just to help not only the channel for systematic geekology, but it also kind of boosts my ego a little bit. That's something I could use on this special day, which of course is Christmas Eve. This special Christmas Eve release. What does this issue have to do with Christmas? Nothing. But it's also one of the only times I'll be able to record in this setup this week with family coming in the town. So here I am coming out with all of you to talk about Spider-Man appearance by appearance. So this issue is the first appearance of one of the most amazing villains of Spider-Man history, Dr. Octopus. And Otto Octavius here. I'm so ready to get into this, but before that, we need to go, as we do always, into what's the setup here, what's going on, who did this, who wrote it, who drew it, so on and so forth. Now, this is, like I said, Amazing Spider-Man number 3. This was written in the week that would be there you go. This is week 15 in 1963. The release date is April 9th, 1963. The story is Spider-Man versus Dr. Octopus. Well, imagine that. Could you figure that out from just looking at the cover? Well, not if you were living in 1963. This is your introduction to the man, the myth, the legend, Otto Octavius. Now, this is written by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, penciled by Steve Ditko, inked by Steve Ditko, lettered by John Duffy, edited by Stan Lee. So, what else was happening in Marvel at this time of the month? Well, here we have in the entire month of April for Marvel, we start with, of course, Journey into Mystery 93, where we actually have Thor facing off with the real villain who will continue and has staying power. And that, of course, being the communist menace of the radioactive man. This is a fun, goofy story. It's full of that old Marvel, like we've talked before, like the communist menace is on the way, and like as someone who kind of agrees with some of that, like even I can see the hokiness of it. It's a lot of fun, but the Radioactive Man is a great villain that will appear over time. He's an Avengers villain. He becomes a member of Thunderbolts at one point in time. Lots of good stuff there with him. Next up, uh, not quite as good is Tales to Astonish 45, where in the last issue, which we didn't cover because at this point in time, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but Spider-Man is kind of a bi-monthly kind of schedule, if I remember correctly. Well, in the last issue, we see Janet Van Dyne for the first time becoming the Wasp, and she now joins in issue 45 to help Hank Pym, Ant-Man, as they both fight against a returning egghead who had appeared a little earlier in Tales to Astonish before we really started covering it here. I think like issue 38 or something like that. Oh, that reminds me. What was I said something last time about like the Spectacular Spider-Man where it's revealed about the Tinkerer and stuff like that, that they're not aliens. It was all Mysterio was involved and stuff like that. I think I said it was 62. I think it's actually 52. Whichever one I said, it's 10 away in that other direction. So my apologies for that. But I don't think anyone else cares about that but me. But there you go. It would hound me if I did not mention that at all. Next up, we have Fantastic Four number 16, where Ant-Man crosses over with them to help them fight against the menace of Doctor Doom in the realm of Subatomica. And by the way, webheads, we are 2 issues away from fighting Doctor Doom ourselves, but it won't be 2 streams, and you'll see why in a little bit. So after that, we go to Strange Tales 110, where the Human Torch fights against the terrible duo of the Wizard and the Trapster, which is for Strange Tales pretty okay. The Wizard, they try and set him up as like the intelligent villain versus Johnny's kind of like he's not an idiot, but he's also not, a genius either. And what we see here is kind of the foundations of what will eventually become the Frightful Four, who Spider-Man will actually help the FF fight several times over in Marvel history. So that's important for us to learn as well. And last but certainly kind of least, is Tales of Suspense 43, where Iron Man must defeat Kala, Queen of the Netherworld, as she invades and needlessly complicates the origins of Atlantis in the Marvel Universe. Kala will actually be a villain who does appear a couple times more in Marvel history, but definitely not a heavy hitter. So that's it for what was happening in Amazing Spider-Man in Marvel around the time of the release of Amazing Spider-Man #3. What do you guys care about? That's, of course, what happens in Amazing Spider-Man #3. So let's just get into this bad boy. And here we start with Peter coming in full Spider-Man guard. There's these criminals around, and what are they doing? Well, of course, they're trying to steal stuff. They got this safe walking around there. But in our first appearance of the spider kind of signal on his belt, they see, oh no, Spider-Man is here. And it's kind of one of those great images that just, this is where it starts. Over time, you'll probably see in like a cold opening of a Spider-Man book, like there'll be some crooks going around or something like that. Say no one, no one's around here, and then suddenly the spider signal will be beaming down at them. They know, oh no, Spider-Man is here, and that's his kind way of saying we're screwed. So some people might give up later on, some people might fight him. Here we see they attempt the fight and get webbed up in the end as he effortlessly takes them out as he should because they're just a bunch of thugs. They don't really have superpowers or anything like that. And we see the police actually, don't say anything overly positive about Spider-Man, but they're used to this to the point where they know, okay, Spider-Man's actually done our jobs for us here. That's pretty good. And that brings us to, of course, that grand old menace of Marvel, and that being atomic energy. As we see Dr. Octavius, also known as Dr. Octopus, because as we see in here, he has this special device where he's added 4 tentacles on it, where he can get work done that normally he wouldn't be able to get close to. But because they're the ones getting irradiated and not him, he's A-OK. Now, this is, I mean, for the time, okay science. And I'm not gonna pretend like I'm some genius who understands all the science of everything, but like if there's something I do notice, I'll do my best to bring it up. If there's something I'm deficient in, like please fill me in on what I don't know. That way we can both be a lot smarter in this world. But this is actually a really ingenious device for what's going on here, and it showcases like Octavius's ability to like be intelligent, and not only that, but like be able to go beyond what normal science can do at this time and create something that isn't possible then, and I highly doubt it's possible now with the device he has. Now we do have, and robotics has come a long way since the 60s, but I don't think we have it to the point where we can mentally link them to do certain things. But yeah, he is doing his experiments with some especially dangerous and volatile chemicals. So, in the pursuit of science, which is a big rallying cry of a lot of villains across Marvel, as we'll see along the way. But unfortunately, he, like many other egotistical people, like even closely related to Doctor Doom, as has been revealed, if I remember correctly, in some of the older Fantastic Four issues, is that he ended up the way he did because he just got too overconfident in his own ability to do his job, and it blows up in his face. And what happens beyond that? Well, Dr. Octavius is now bonded with his tentacles, which is, for a villain origin story, pretty dang good. Because like you see this at the point here for Octavius is that whole sense of like he is pursuing a good thing. Like he's trying to get science, and I know science is kind of, I should stop saying that word. Like increase our understanding of the world and stuff like that, but in a very egotistical fashion. So when this does happen to him, there is some sympathy on our part for what happens to him. But at the end of the day, we also go, wish you should have had more safety precautions. You should have been thinking a little better. But as he tries to go back to work, like, and then the doctor and nurses stop him, we start to see the mental instability that will get picked up on by a lot of other people along the way of how Otto, his mind ain't all there. And this is that barest bit of say, oh, the window is barred, so they must think that they're gonna keep me a prisoner here. No one makes a prisoner of Dr. Octopus. When that could very well not be what they intend, but he goes to that dark place because it means someone's acting against him. So what does he do? He uses his tentacles for the first time and breaks through the bars and ends up at that point, he doesn't even leave because he will end up taking these poor people hostage. Uh, but we go over to Peter going to the Daily Bugle. And J. Jonah Jameson, that big charmer that he is demanding that Peter get pictures of the injured Dr. Octopus in his bed. Which is terrible. But it's so Jonah that, this isn't his moral event horizon or anything like that. It's Jonah being Jonah. I got to get the scoop. I got to get this in my paper. I'm going to rant about Spider-Man. It's somehow Spider-Man's fault, more than likely. So Peter is going to do his best to get those pictures. And as he does, he stumbles upon the fact that Dr. Octopus, has taken everyone in there hostage, and notices the tentacles out there. And it's like, what the heck is going on? As Dr. Octopus is trying to tell them that, with his powers, his newfound powers of using what he was already doing, but now they're permanently bonded to him, he's going to be able to do his research in a way that no one can resist him, and he's going to make people serve him. And he threatens the doctor when he's like, "Hey, like rationally, like, hey, you got to rest. Like, stuff's going on here. We don't really understand, but Octavius just can't take it." Lifts him up with two of his tentacles and is about to seemingly throw him out the window when Peter swings in, breaks through it. They meet for the first time here, and we get a great reference here when Octopus is like, "Spider-Man," and Peter says, "Well, I sure ain't Albert Schweitzer. Now, if you like me," and you either didn't know that name, or you were kind of familiar hearing it before, like I was. You go, "Who is that?" Well, I did a little research there, and I was actually really happy I did, because Albert Schweitzer, well, there's two, but the one they're probably referring to here is a theologian and a Lutheran minister who, at one point in time, had written what was it? The doctrine. He had the idea. I had it up here. It's the reverence for life philosophy, and he himself was a very brilliant man. I have not done like as much as I should have all the research for him, like, but then again, he wasn't really the sole focus. It's like one mention of him, but from what little I have read, he's a very fascinating figure. I don't really agree with him with a lot of his theology, but it's something that I would encourage you all to look at and say, "Oh, well, how does he reason this? How does he reason that?" A very intelligent man that ultimately I think ends up in the wrong way. But this is a cool reference for Spider-Man to make because it shows Peter. Maybe it shows a little too much of Stan and Steve, and like, oh well, the kids, they definitely know who Albert Schweitzer is, but no, I think this is actually characterizing Peter well, in that he makes a reference to someone that Flash Thompson isn't going to know who this is. Uh, Liz Allen isn't going to know who this is, or Sally Averill, or any of his other, compatriots here. Of science, but showing a love for theology, philosophy, um, religion, and also as well, like Schweitzer was known as a polymath, so he was big into many things, and like being like a polymath, being someone who's like actually better than everyone else for pretty much at studying music and other stuff like that. Really fascinating guy if you want to look him up. But I know it's just one reference made here, and I'm geeking out on it. So if you don't care about that, sorry for wasting like the last 4 minutes of your life. So what happens here? Well, Peter tries to fight him, but being that young, impetuous person who didn't come in here with a plan, and that's one of the things that over time we start seeing him being a little smarter, thinking things through, but that impetuousness never truly leaves Peter behind. And this is a great way to showcase this. Look, in any other way to have this fight, Peter should win 100% of the time. Like there should be no question, because Octavius is still just a guy. He's got some really powerful metal tentacles that at this point in time are just metal, and we'll get to the adamantium in the 90s forever from now. But he should still be Octavius, but he's young, he's reckless, he's stupid, he's not listening to uh, his spider sense or anything like that. No, he gets whacked in the head by one of the tentacles and tries to fight against Octavius, but using his webbing and actually even in the midst of panicking a little bit, he's kind of smart, tries to use the webbing to keep the tentacles together, but it fails because the shorter amount of time they're in, the easier it is to break out of them. And this also establishes the strength of the tentacles and that they themselves are able to break out of the webbing's strength that would normally keep them together, bound up. Octavius is no simple criminal like what we saw earlier in this issue. He's actually someone who can do much more, and it's gotten to the point where Octavius has gotten, well, shall we say, bored of Spider-Man and wraps him up in those tentacles and then smacks him in the face and throws him and flings him out the window, like completely manhandles him. And this is extraordinary because of the effect that it has on Peter. I mean, look, this is incredibly well done artwork here, showing like the complete and utter mental anguish that Peter is suffering from his first real defeat. Like earlier in the last issue, we did see him be defeated by the Vulture, but no one else saw it. Like he was trying to save people here, and he was so just cocksure, so ready to prove himself that he could take down Octavius, and it's worth nothing because he just got manhandled and flung out of a window when he knows he's stronger than Octavius. So this is going to be a huge thread that shows up in the rest of Spider-Man's stories is, when do I give up? When do I stop doing this insane thing of trying to protect other people? This makes no sense. Why is it my job to do all this? And we had that very small bit of retirement for a bit in his mind of, I'm not going to do this. It's not worth the trouble. Spider-Man's brought me nothing but pain. And we'll get through the rest of how that's handled up in this issue. So he goes through that character arc very quickly, but it's establishing something that will definitely happen later on. The most iconic being, of course, what is it, 51 when it's, or 52 when it's Spider-Man No More. Always that classic image of the Spider-Man suit in the trash and Peter walking away from it. Around the time, is he fighting the Kingpin? Then we'll get there eventually, so we'll find out together. But here we see Dr. Octavius has gone off to get back to where he was before, smuggles his way inside of the atomic center and takes it over again just so he can prove that not only is he the strongest man alive, he's also the smartest man alive. So he's doing experiments that normally he would have had like someone say, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. But no one can stop him now. The entire plant is his. He's in complete control. And we start to see that the military is kind of concerned. Like, this is obviously a place where we don't want people to abuse the nuclear power inside of this atomic facility. But we get a brief moment with Peter and Aunt May, and it's a very powerful moment for them to help Aunt May. Like, she's had a subtle characterization here, but Peter's down on himself, and she's noticed he's been moping in his room for hours, and he's not willing to go out and get pictures. And she tries to talk to him, ask him what's wrong, and obviously both of them are still struggling with the death of her husband, his uncle, the man who was really a father to him. And Peter is kind of a typical teenager. He is like, my own personal problem, I'll get over it. And he goes to leave for school, which uh, establishes a real good thread between the two of them and their relationship. It's like, not only is he hiding a lot about Spider-Man from his aunt, from the woman who is pretty much his mother, but it's also this thing of he's hiding that guilt and shame of Uncle Ben's death and how he could have prevented it. That's going to be something that continues to be part of the friction between the two of them for years to come. Is at this point when Peter does go to school, uh, his friends try and talk to him again, which is kind of, I mean, for them, it's reaching out. They're trying to talk to him, and tell him about, hey, The governor asked the Fantastic Four to try to capture Dr. Octopus, which would make sense because at this point in Marvel history, guess who doesn't exist? The Avengers don't exist. It would be a little bit before we get to them. So the people they're going to ask to help are the Fantastic Four, of course. It makes perfect sense to do so. But at this point, they couldn't get the rest of them, but they could get the Human Torch. So he's going to address, the entire class, and he gives this little speech. And for Johnny, this is especially young Johnny. This is quite effective of how, like, and even throwing a little casual dig at Ben. Ben's no idiot, but it's the rivalry between the two of them is something that's been well established before. So he's got to, throw the thing under the bus as, he says, if, I talk about a thing, I'd be thinking 2 + 2 = 3. But he brings up an excellent point about not only super heroics, but schoolwork, studies, and how easy it is to get discouraged. Any idiot can get discouraged. But the important thing is to never give up. And he repeats, never give up. And Peter, this whole time, has been listening to what Johnny has to say. And it's a beautiful moment between the two of them because Johnny has no idea how he's affecting Spider Man's thought process right here. They barely even know each other at this point in time. But Peter hears what he has to say and he thinks on it and goes, he's right, which is so much fun because eventually, I think 2 streams from now, we'll cover Strange Tales Annual #2. And this will be like the first official team up between Peter and Johnny and what establishes their friendship/rivalry that is one of the oldest in Marvel. And I love the two of them together. They're such a good pair. They're both hot-headed egotists who are convinced that their way is the right way. They just handle it in different ways, but Peter's smarter than Johnny, and Johnny's a bit more he's not an idiot. He's not a moron, but he's just not as smart as someone like Peter is. So the friction between the two of them, it's such a fun interplay because especially in early issues of Amazing Spider-Man, Johnny is essentially another member of the supporting cast. That's something that eventually loses its gusto along the way, but for now, the setting up the parallels between the two of them, Johnny is an established superhero. He has suffered defeat multiple times. So when he's talking about this, he's talking about it from experience. And this is really, once again, outside of that vulture thing that no one else saw except for Peter, Spider-Man's first loss. So it's hitting him more. Like, obviously, it was the first time we face an incident where we didn't get the results we wanted. It's going to hurt us a lot more than, the 7th time it happens or the 9th or whenever. This is the first, and especially being a kid, Peter hasn't had to deal with that yet. So this is an important establishing moment in his life to show, oh, yeah, I kind of gave up because it sucked. But guess what? No one else is going to be able to do this. I've got to do it. So he thanks Johnny in a typical way. The Human Torch is like, yeah, sure, whatever. You over there, as he's probably hitting on all the girls who are trying to get his autograph there, and moves along. But this means the world to Peter, and it means the world to the Marvel Universe, because what if Peter had given up here? Imagine all the things that wouldn't have been solved, all the people who would have died, the teams who weren't able to have him as a member or teaming up with him along the way. That wouldn't have happened if Peter had just said, nope, I'm done. I lost. I can't handle this life. But Johnny inspires him to be better. So what does he do? He goes out there and he decides, I'm going to be Spider-Man. I'm going to get this done. And not only that, but I'm going to use one of my greatest assets. Yeah, I'm super strong, but what's stronger is my mind. So he goes out to get some chemistry experiments to make, Marvel science happen. And what does he do? He has managed to find something that will enable him to fight against Octavius even better. So he goes out to try and fight him. And in so doing, manages to kind of, redeem himself to an extent. In this fight, he's learned from his past, mistakes here. He's learned to be more agile, to watch out for where the tentacles are going, and he webs up Doc Ock in the face, which is not the only time this will happen in this super villainous superhero uh, rivalry between the two of them, which also needs to be established well if this is going to continue later on. Like, think of Dr. Octopus is probably one of the first people, villains people think of as like Spider-Man's number one. Now, me, I'm more of the opinion is Norman Osborn, Green Goblin, but Octopus is not that far behind. He might even be the number two in my head, but a lot of other people think differently on that, and that's fine. Oh, if you prefer one or the other, let me know in the comments down below. But I mean, I'm more of a, like I said, more of a Norman Osborn, Green Goblin kind of guy. But what we see here is the establishment of that rivalry between the two of them, this never-ending fight to prove who's smarter than one another, who's better than the other. And even in the midst of being webbed up, Octopus still is able to grab around Spider-Man and bring him closer, but his punches aren't the same as Spider-Man's because sure, he has those tentacles, but he's still just a dude. So what does Spider-Man do? He knocks him out in one punch. And it's tremendous at that point in time just to do that for Spidey. He's got this whole sense of, oh man, I can't beat him. I can't do anything. But he outsmarts Octopus by welding. I forgot to mention that with the chemicals, he welds kind of two of them together through this chemical reaction that does science. There's really no other way to say that because I don't think they're explicitly spelled out. And they are. I missed it of how this is possible. But Peter is able to use his intelligence and his physical attributes to gain the advantage in this fight to regain his confidence and still be a superhero at the end of the day. He has saved a lot of people. And to the point when the army does come here, they notice, oh, there's the signal of Spider-Man. He's the one who stopped Dr. Octopus. And we even see that little note there. I forgot to add that image to the setup down there, but it's this small image of a Spider-Man note that will come to see along, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. I don't remember the first time that happens, but that's kind of gist that we're all familiar with if you know the character that well. But Peter doesn't stop there. He goes to see the Human Torch, somehow using his spider sense that tells the Human Torch is in a hotel room somewhere, whatever. The point is he finds him. And to do so, he goes up to Johnny and thanks him in person, which runs the risk, if the Torch is actually intelligent, which for this point in time, thank God he's not, of allowing him to be able to figure out Spider-Man's identity because he would go, wait, what do you mean? Well, who else thanked me earlier today? Oh, that weird kid? Well, I should ask around about him, but he doesn't. And it confuses Johnny immensely, where he's even scratching his head. But this is such a beautiful moment. Like, the art is really like well drawn here, well composed. And as the Human Torch leaves, he's kind of like, I kind of wish Spider-Man was around to join me in the show. It's like people are praising him, but that's not what Peter's about. It'd be great if people praised him more often, but he figured out the problem, thanked the person who inspired him. And even though Flash Thompson's going to make fun of him, say, you know, you're nothing like the Human Torch or Spider-Man, which, is the grand irony of their early relationship there as, their frenemies to, eventual friends, is Flash always praising Spider-Man, but hating Peter. And Peter has that little smirk at the end. It's like, someday I'm going to tell you why, he's a real man compared to Flash. And it's going to be a real pleasure. And that is the end of Amazing Spider-Man #3. So what did you guys think? I'll let you know how I think. I think this is going to be outside of, since I didn't rate Amazing Fantasy 15 and Amazing Spider-Man 1, I will give Amazing Fantasy 15 for that simple story, that wonderful story. That's a 10 out of 10 for me. Amazing Spider-Man 1, I'll give it overall more of like an 8, maybe an 8.5 if I'm generous. But this story right here, if you couldn't feel it from the way I was talking about it, this is a 10 out of 10 for me. It establishes a ton of really good things about the Spider-Man mythos that will be important for even now, all the way in the future, and terrible writing as that was, but is whatever. And helps establish who he is, who his villains are going to be, how he plays well with other superheroes in the Marvel Universe, how a supporting cast works with and against him at the same time. This is tremendous. The Doctor Octopus origin story is one of the best in comics. That's why very rarely will you see retcons here. It's not to say there's never been one, but it's just great. Guys, let me know in the comments below what you're thinking about this series, where you think things are going, like how hyped you are for the next couple of issues as we get to see some more classic Spidey villains and his first official team up with the Human Torch and Strange Tales Annual #2 and so much more. So until next time, see you webheads.